1 second.
Wait for the recording.
We're waiting for the live stream to get started there. And okay, we're good to go, Doug.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that intro this morning. So today, we want to take some time during this safety moment to talk about the relationship between a clean, neat, and orderly workspace and workplace safety. So we refer to this as housekeeping. And there are a lot of potential effects on your safe work environment and how well you maintain that work environment, or how well you do the housekeeping, of your workspaces. Good housekeeping can help us eliminate accidents and fires in the workplace and other types of mishaps. Also, good housekeeping can help us maintain a safe and healthy working conditions by controlling hazards, whether they be health hazards or physical hazards or otherwise. Good housekeeping has a lot of other benefits as well. If our space is clean and organized and neat, it's going to help us save time and money. There's going to be less wasted materials. We're going to have more space to do our work in, which is a great convenience, but also helps us be safer when we're working as well, and can reduce the effort it takes to get the job done. And so there's a lot of benefits from good housekeeping. It also helps us improve our productivity and the quality of the work that we're doing. And I think we would probably all agree that when you have a clean space to work in, that it makes you feel better. And there can be benefits to morale by maintaining good, clean, organized workspaces. And I think a great benefit, and I've told people this over the years many times, is the perception that it gives when you have a good, clean working environment or good, clean working space. It creates an image, of a well-run, successful organization. We often tell people that if they are trying to prepare for, say, some sort of regulatory visit, maybe an OSHA visit or some other regulatory visit, if you really want to avoid, an inspector coming in and really digging deep on you and, trying to find a lot of problems with your operations, have the space clean. If there's one thing that you can do, it's have your workshops and your workspaces neat, clean, and organized, because that is a safer work environment. And generally someone coming in to look at your space is going to be impressed by that. And it's going to give them the feeling that this is a clean, safe, work environment as well. The results of poor housekeeping are many. There's a lot of different kinds of accidents that can occur as a result of poor housekeeping. One can just be slips, trips, and falls. Fires can also be a greater hazard or more likely if we've got poor housekeeping. There's chemical hazards or accidents that could happen with your machinery, that can be affected by how well your housekeeping is done. You can have injuries that result from electrical shock that can be a byproduct of your housekeeping. Maybe falling objects, if you've got things stored overhead on racks and shelves, that may come loose or fall down onto people, or things that are leaned up against the wall that could tip over. And there's other health hazards that can be created or that can exist because of unsanitary or unsafe conditions, because of, for example, air quality, dusts or molds or different things like that. So housekeeping really involves developing good habits. We want to develop good habits personally, but also, as a team. So, you as well as your coworkers, need to develop certain habits to make sure that we can keep this workspace clean and organized and safe for everybody working in that space. Some things that we want to do, some habits that we want to develop is taking time every day for housekeeping. Set some time aside every day, whether it's at the beginning or the end of the day or both, to go through and make sure that you've picked up and cleaned up your workspace, especially at the end of the day, because that affects the safety of the environment when you come in to start the day tomorrow. You can evaluate your workspace before starting work. Look for slip, trips, or fall hazards that are existing in the work environment, or for fire hazards, machine hazards, or other cut hazards where someone could maybe get scratched or nicked or cut on something. remove those hazards before you start to work. If you have any spills, clean up those spills, right away. Put away your tools, when you're done with them. Make sure that electrical cords and hoses that you don't need are also properly stowed. Close drawers, when you get something out of them, close that drawer back up, or cabinet doors, make sure you close those. Don't leave them standing open. And as waste accumulates throughout the day, whether that's paper, cardboard, plastic, or different things, we need to make sure that we dispose of those properly and don't allow them to accumulate. Don't leave equipment running. When you leave a work area, make sure you turn it off and clean it up so that it's ready for use the next time you need it. Clean as you go is a great habit to be developing. Putting your tools and equipment away in their proper place, when you're through with them. And, waiting until the end of the shift. If you do that, it could expose you or others to these hazards. If you say, well, I'll take care of that later, I'll take care of that at the end of the day, we're just leaving that hazard out there for a greater exposure. So a good habit is to address it as we go. And finally, take responsibility for hazards, even if you didn't create them. I know that can be kind of frustrating. If somebody else makes a mess, we're not their mom. We don't think we need to be going around cleaning up after people, but we are all responsible for a safe work environment. So, if you see a hazard, address it, whether that's taking care of it and mitigating the hazard, or whether it's getting the person responsible for it to take care of it, or saying something to the supervisor. Let's make sure that we don't let these things just stay the way they are because I didn't make that mess. We need to make sure that we address and eliminate all of these hazards. And so we're going to take a little bit of time, and we're going to talk about different ways we do this and how we prevent these different types of possible injuries that can occur as a result of, poor housekeeping in our work environment. One of the things that we can do that can be very helpful is to have a checklist that we follow to help us keep our housekeeping, habits going, in an orderly way, or using them regularly. It's a good idea to develop a checklist of housekeeping responsibilities and use it on a daily basis. Items on your checklist could include different parts of your work area, like the floors, walk areas, aisles, staircases or stairways, your individual workstations or the area around individual pieces of equipment, your exits from the building, especially emergency exits, your storage areas, where you may be storing chemicals or materials, or where you may be accumulating, debris or waste materials. Also are going to be potentially areas where we have these hazards, whether they be hazards to us injuring ourselves or potential fire hazards or otherwise, can be created. So have a regular way that you go through and check the safety of your workspace on a daily basis. One of the most common injuries that we may see as a result of poor housekeeping are the slip, trips, and falls. Any number of injuries can result, when we fall down or when we slip. You don't even have to fall all the way down. Sprains and strains can happen, if you slip a little bit and catch yourself. That jerking motion that occurs, when your feet slip and your body reacts to try and regain balance can cause muscle strains or sprains, even if you don't fall down. But if you do fall down, then obviously there's even more potential for those injuries. So sprains and strains, you could get a torn ligament, from a slip or fall. And that's very painful, and takes a long time to heal as well. If you fall down, especially onto a hard surface, you could break a bone. A more serious type of fall could be where you injure your spine. If you fall to your back or your neck, and you could get a spinal injury, and that can, even cause paralysis, which is a scary thing to think about. And even beyond that, there's the potential for death. Every year, tens of thousands of people die as a result of falls, whether it's at work or away from work, at home or recreating. And so the potential for slips, trips, and falls is something we don't want to minimize. We want to make sure we take that very seriously. How do we prevent slips? If we're going to really prevent the potential for slips in our work environment, we have to have a willingness to go the extra mile. Even though it may not be your job, take the time and make the effort to remove slip hazards when you see them in order to prevent accidents, whether that's to keep you from slipping or whether, you're going to help prevent a fall for somebody else. We see situations. I remember reading a claim that came in, a while back, where a mechanic working in the shop had a pool of oil that had leaked onto the shop floor. And as he described how the accident occurred, he described his efforts to very carefully step over the puddle of oil every time he went past it, rather than stopping and cleaning up and addressing the slip hazard. He just kind of in his mind said, okay, I know that puddle's there. I'll be very careful to step over it, and not step in it. Well, that worked great for, a half a dozen times that he stepped over the puddle, but then he was backing up and turning around, without really thinking. And he stepped in that puddle and he slipped and fell and got himself hurt pretty seriously. And so it's really important to make sure we address those things in a timely manner, not just for our safety, but for others as well. So don't just be thinking that you can avoid the injury. How can you avoid that injury for somebody else too? Some spills like water can just be cleaned up with a paper towel, but other types of products that are spilled like oil or other chemicals may require a special absorbent, wipes or absorbing materials or some other special process for cleaning them up. So make sure that you're familiar with and have the training for cleaning up spills with regards to the types of chemicals that you're using. And we'll mention that a little bit more here in a few minutes. Liquid leaks must be repaired right away. If something's dripping or leaking, let's make sure we address that leak. Let's fix the leak so we stop having that hazard in the work environment. If you can't do it yourself safely, report the problem immediately, to somebody else who can arrange to get that taken care of, and make sure you keep that spill cleaned up. Also placing a barrier around that affected area where that slippery condition exists to help people know that that is a slippery area or not to go in there can be very helpful as well. Pick up objects off the floor. Make sure that plastic or paper that accumulates on the floor gets picked up, because a little piece of plastic or even a little piece of paper, when you step on it, can have a significant impact on that coefficient of friction between your foot and the floor and can create a very slippery situation. So let's make sure we're picking up, paper and plastic and other objects that may be accumulating on the ground, which can cause somebody to slip or fall. Make sure that you are sweeping up debris and materials as you go. Sometimes very light granular particles like sawdust or other kinds of dust can create a very slippery condition on a smooth concrete surface, for example. And we need to clean those up to help prevent slips and falls. And don't forget to wear the proper kind of footwear. Having shoes that are slip resistant is very important, but I would remind you that a slip resistant sole isn't always going to be the right sole for every slippery condition, and that you need to make sure that the shoes that you're wearing have a slip resistant or a non-slip sole that is appropriate for the type of condition that you're dealing with. An oily surface on a smooth concrete floor is going to require a different kind of sole for it to be slip resistant than, say, walking around in the mud out in the yard. And so make sure you, again, have the proper footwear. Also, when we're trying to prevent trips, we need to take initiative and responsibility to remove those hazards in order to prevent somebody from being injured. Take responsibility for trip hazards that you see. Again, clean up debris such as straps or bands from boxes that could get tangled around somebody's legs. Put tools and equipment away when you're finished using them instead of just leaving them laying on the floor or something. Electrical cords or air hoses or other types of hoses, if you're not using them, let's coil them up and let's put them away, get them off the floor so that we're not stepping on them. And even when you're using them, let's be careful about how we drape those cords and hoses around so that they don't become a hazard for somebody, if we're dragging them across, say, a common walking path or something like that. Don't stack boxes in the walkway or other objects or materials. You know, let's keep those marked walkways clear of any kind of trip hazard. Again, we mentioned stairways and walkways. Stairways could be especially dangerous, so be very careful not to leave things piled up on a stairway, whether that's boxes or tools or anything. As people come downstairs, if we have a trip hazard there, that could be a very potentially fatal situation. And so keep those stairways clear. Close drawers and doors when you're not using them, because people could trip over those and run into them. And if you're carrying objects around, make sure that you have clear visibility. Make sure you can see over the boxes that you're carrying so that you can see obstacles in your walking path that could cause a trip hazard for you as well. We also want to be able to prevent falls. So good housekeeping can help us prevent falls by, you know, again, being careful on stairs and not leaving things stacked up on stairs or on the landings of stairs. If you're using a ladder, make sure that you use the right ladder for the job. Inspect the ladder before you use it. Set it up properly and climb and use that ladder in an appropriate manner. And I'd refer you to your ladder safety training. But that's also a great potential for falls, is how we use ladders in the workplace. Be very careful about just leaving ladders up as a permanent, you know, way of getting in and out of, you know, some shelves or something like that. A ladder should be stowed away when it's not in use, because that ladder could fall over on somebody or it could get in the way of somebody who's walking around. And so make sure that we use ladders safely and that we also store ladders safely as well. Be sure to maintain your fall protection. If you've had to open up some safety chains on a guardrail, on a walkway or mezzanine or something, make sure you put those chains or those barriers back in place after you're done, so that protective barrier is there for the next person. Also, if you're doing something that requires a fall arrest system or fall arrest equipment, make sure that you're using it when it's required and that you inspect it carefully before each use. It's in good condition and that you're using that appropriately with proper procedures. Good housekeeping can also help us prevent fires in our work environment. For example, you should always store flammable liquids in a proper approved flammable liquid container or in a flammables cabinet or both. These containers prevent sparks and other ignition sources from igniting the liquids stored in the cabinets. Also, those liquids stored inside those cabinets, when they're closed up properly, if there's a fire outside of the cabinet, can prevent, you know, those liquids inside the cabinet from contributing to the fire sooner and making the fire worse than it needs to be. So make sure that you're using those flammables cabinets and that you're using them appropriately and you keep them closed. If you're using chemicals that are reactive, that they could react if mixed with other chemicals or coming into contact with the air or other things like that, make sure you're familiar with that hazard. Again, be familiar with the safety data sheets of the chemicals that you're using so that you are using the chemical appropriately, you're storing the chemical appropriately. If it's spilled, you know how to clean it up safely and appropriately as well. We can have certain chemicals can be pretty scary and have some hazards that could be a big surprise to you if you're not familiar with, you know, those stated hazards that you'll learn about on the safety data sheet. Accumulation of combustibles, a big one that we see as we go around, our cardboard. You know, you got stuff comes in boxes and you're unpacking, you know, tool supplies or equipment as they come in, and you get these big stacks of cardboard. And obviously that's a big, you know, combustible load. And you want to make sure and keep that trash under control. So the accumulation of combustibles like paper, cardboard, wood pallets, rags, especially if they're oily rags, you know, are a great place for fires to get started and spread quickly. So we want to make sure we put these materials in their designated locations where they're away from ignition sources, and preferably, you know, away from, you know, the building where a fire could cause a lot of damage. Good housekeeping also prevents fires, you know, by keeping combustible materials, dust, grease, and other things like that away from electrical equipment or hot machinery. And sometimes this is even just comes down to, you know, the way we maintain, you know, some of our electrical equipment or machinery, keeping the dust down. Dust can really accumulate inside of different pieces of equipment like furnaces, for example. And dust can be, combustible, and we want to make sure that we're controlling that potential where a fire could start. So keep any kind of combustible storage of waste or other materials away from potential ignition sources, electrical or, hot sources. Another thing that we need to think about with our good housekeeping and fire safety is our ability to get out of the building in case of a fire. Always keep your evacuation routes clear. Don't store boxes or other items in aisles, hallways, on stairwells, or in the emergency exits. Make sure that we keep those exits cleared on both sides of the door. We want to be able to get out the door, and we want to be able to open the door too. So make sure we keep those routes of egress, clear of any storage that could block our ability to, get out in an emergency. Fire extinguishers, need to be accessible. So make sure that you don't use that fire extinguisher as a coat hanger, or to hang air hoses or electrical cords on or anything else. The access to that fire extinguisher needs to be kept clear at all times. That fire extinguisher needs to be visible and not blocked by stacks of boxes or garbage cans or other things like that may be placed in front of that fire extinguisher. And I'm sure most of you have, the areas in front of your fire extinguishers marked, reminding people not to store things in those areas. Your electrical panels, your circuit breaker panels, also need to be accessible. In an emergency, you may need to shut the power off to a piece of equipment, or to a building where the fires, or maybe the fire is an electrical fire that started, or it's on a piece of electrical equipment. You're going to want to shut down the power to that area, as you are, dealing with that emergency. So that electrical panel needs to also be accessible. So again, don't hang things on the door, in front of the door, or block that door. We need to make sure we have good, clear access to that electrical panel. And, we need to have unobstructed fire suppression as well. So if you've got fire sprinklers in your facility, make sure you don't hang anything, on that sprinkler head. That could damage that sprinkler head so it doesn't work appropriately, or could cause it to go off when you don't want it to go off. Also, you want to avoid painting your sprinkler heads. That can also affect their ability to turn on when they need to. And when you're storing items, as you're stacking things up on shelves or in the middle of the room, make sure that we keep all items at least 18 inches below the bottom of the sprinkler heads, so that if those fire sprinklers go off, there's no obstruction to the spray pattern to put that fire out. Good housekeeping contributes to chemical safety as well. And I've mentioned this a couple times already, but make sure that with your chemicals that you're using, that you've got them in the proper containers with labels on them, so that you're aware of the hazards and so that you're aware of what that chemical is in those containers. Make sure that you review the safety data sheets for those chemicals, so that you are aware of first aid procedures, cleanup procedures, storage procedures, all these things that are very important in making sure that we're using and storing those chemicals safely. Make sure that you inspect these containers on a regular basis for leaks or damage, whether or not you're using them right now or not. When you go into the storage area where these chemicals are, take a look and make sure that those containers are in good condition and things aren't coming out or cracked or damaged. In addition, good housekeeping also requires the use of the appropriate personal protective equipment when working around hazardous chemicals. And again, your safety data sheet will give you instructions on what the appropriate safety personal protective equipment is for using those chemicals. And also make sure that if you have any spills, or leaks, that you address those right away. If you've got a leak, let's fix the leak. Let's get that into a container that's not leaking, or fix the plumbing that's leaking, or whatever it is, and clean up spills right away, so we don't have a hazard that just, is there in the workplace, ongoing. And it's not good enough just to be able to tell yourself, I know there's a leak there, I won't step there. Because that may not always work. We're not always thinking, that thoroughly when we're moving around, and there may be other people come into that work environment who aren't aware of that hazard. And so we need to address it. Good housekeeping also requires that we take good care of our machinery and the space around our machineries. That means keeping the space around your machinery clear, so that you can use that machinery safely. We want to make sure that you inspect that machinery before you use it to make sure it's in good, safe working condition, as well as the working space around that piece of machinery. Make sure your safety guards are in place and working properly. Follow the lockout tagout procedures for that piece of equipment should you be servicing that equipment, or should some repairs be needed to a piece of equipment. And make sure that when you're done using the equipment that you clean it up, that you put it away, and that you put the tools away and clean up the work area around that piece of equipment every time, so that it is in safe condition and in a safe environment the next time it's going to be used. Good housekeeping is going to affect electrical safety in the workplace. You know, if we have too many cords, you know, around, especially if we're plugging those cords into the same circuit or the same, you know, multi-plug adapter or something, we run the risk of overloading a circuit, which could cause a fire. Make sure you inspect your electrical cords, because, you know, if we're using cords, especially if we're, you know, have them out laying across the floor where they're getting walked on, or equipment maybe driving over them, you know, that can cause damage to the cord that could result in an electrical, you know, an electrocution hazard for you, or a spark that could start a fire. Don't stack combustible materials near your electrical heaters or furnaces. Keep combustibles away from your electrical panels and electrical equipment. You know, try to keep the dust, you know, addressed around and in that equipment, as well as keeping other debris and grease away from those electrical equipment and service areas. Replace broken and missing covers, you know, for your switches, outlets, the doors on your circuit breaker panels. You know, those should all be covered or kept closed. If the cover's broken, we need to replace it. Inside the circuit breaker panel, if you have any open slots where there's a space for a breaker switch, but there's no switch there, make sure those slots are blanked out, so that it can block a spark from coming out from there, or from someone maybe sticking their finger inside and getting shocked as well. We want to prevent cuts and scrapes and other types of injuries. So good housekeeping also can help us if we are looking for objects that are sticking out into walkways or workspaces, especially if they're sharp objects or if they have jagged edges on them. You know, we want to make sure we address those by removing that object, or by otherwise mitigating that sharp edge so that somebody doesn't get cut. We can also prevent cuts by making sure that if we're cleaning up broken glass or sharp shards of stuff, that we do that appropriately. Wear gloves when you're doing that, and never pick up broken glass with your bare hands. Also, you can help prevent cuts by storing blades and sharp tools carefully. For example, store new blades and bandsaws blades, or circular saw blades, or other utility knife blades in a labeled box, so someone doesn't accidentally stick their hand inside that box and get cut. You know, when it's time to discard an old blade, you know, use tape or cardboard to cover that blade, so that it, you know, it removes that cut hazard, you know, once you throw it away. And if you have small blades, you can collect those in some sort of a sharps container as well, to help prevent people from cutting themselves on those old blades. You know, be sure to keep your blades on utility knives sheathed, you know, or the blades retracted at all times. We want to make sure that we're using the right PPE. And that does involve some housekeeping, because our PPE needs to be kept in good condition and clean. So inspect your PPE before you're using it. You know, keep it clean, store it properly so that it doesn't get damaged or contaminated with dirt or chemicals while it's in storage. And make sure you replace your PPE when it's worn out, damaged, or no longer providing the protection required. You know, the right PPE is going to involve, you know, having gloves, you know, goggles, you know, make sure that you have, you know, all the right PPE for the work that you're doing. When you're doing housekeeping, you know, we want to make sure we're using the right equipment. So have the brooms, vacuum, mops, sponges, or whatever else is going to be appropriate for cleaning up the types of spills or messes that you're dealing with. If you've got oily rags, make sure that those rags are collected into a metal can with a tight lid on it, because those rags could be a source of a fire ignition. And so we want to make sure that we control that as well. And also be careful when using cleaning compounds. A lot of the cleaning compounds that we use in the work environment may be stronger, more industrial strength than what we use at home. And so they may require special protection. Make sure you read the labels. Make sure you're familiar with the safety data sheet for those chemicals also. Good housekeeping obviously is going to require picking things up and moving them around often. So make sure that you can lift and carry things safely. So make sure you check your route of travel so that you're not tripping while you're carrying something. Make sure that when you're picking something up, you get a good grip on it. Hold it close to your body, lift with your legs, not your back. Does this sound familiar? Other trainings that we've talked about before. Make sure that you can see where you're going and watch where you're going so that you don't fall as you're moving those things around. So in summary, good housekeeping helps prevent fires and a lot of other types of accidents that we may have. Good housekeeping is everybody's responsibility. Even if it's not your mess, we need to address it. You know, whether it's cleaning it up or whether it's, making sure that the responsible person is taking care of it. But we all need to be watching out for these hazards because we share the hazards even if we didn't all create the mess. Be aware of the hazards in your work environment and make sure that you're, being careful to address and mitigate those hazards, not just avoid the hazards. And those hazards need to be removed or reported so that in the future, we don't have a reoccurrence of the same kind of hazard over and over and over. So any questions about good housekeeping for safety?
Folks, go ahead and type your questions into the chat box and we'll answer those right now at this time. Doug, great information there to help us out on that. I remember an adage when I was working in industry, we would practice the 5S system, and it was a place for everything and everything in its place. And even to the point where you'd have lockers, where people would put their coats when they came in. The tops of the lockers didn't have a flat top on them. We had an angled top, so you couldn't set anything on top of the lockers. We designed in for housekeeping, so you just couldn't collect stuff that wasn't supposed to be there, and it did a good job. I'm trying to see if there's any questions there. I'm not seeing any. All right. Well, I think you covered the subject so well that nobody even has a question. All right. Brent, anything to add?
Nothing else. Great job.
All right, Doug, final word.
Have a safe day. Keep your workspaces safe and really respect each other. Help each other keep things clean. And you're really not just looking out for your safety, but you're looking out for your coworkers' safety at the same time when you do this. So appreciate you being here this morning.
Awesome. Ooh, let's see.